Throughout the 30-year history of Sonic the Hedgehog, several titles seem to stick out as defining moments in the series' history. There's the start of the series proper in 1991, the smash hit sequel in 1992, released on non-Sega platforms such as Sonic Heroes and Sonic Colors that respectively introduced entire new generations of fans to the series. Even not so well received titles such as 2006's Sonic the Hedgehog for Xbox 360 have their places in gaming history. And of course, there's the fan favorite Sonic Adventure. Released in 1999 as a launch title for the ill-fated Sega Dreamcast console, this beloved title would mark Sonic's first adventure in a 3D world. Instead of the sprite-based 2D stages of the previous titles, Sonic Adventure would bring the Blue Hedgehog and his friends into the third dimension, complete with voice acting and a variety of playable characters. But this was not originally intended to be Sonic's first proper 3D outing. There's a game that was never released, a sort of specter that looms over the series' history. After years of work and a development cycle so vicious that two of the people working on it got so ill that they nearly died, this would be Sonic X-Treme for the Sega Saturn and PC. Cancelled in 1996, it's a game that really did seem to haunt Sega. Many attribute its cancellation to making the Sega Saturn a commercial flop outside of Japan. Its development was such a burning failure of such a high profile that you'd think that it'd make Sega forever ban the words Sonic and X-Treme from ever being less than a sentence lengths away from each other. However, there would be two other titles bearing the Sonic X-Treme moniker. Featuring the words spelled in a far less tubularly 90s fashion, these would be Sonic X-Treme for the original Xbox and Game Boy Advance. These games would be worked on by two separate studios, years apart and completely independently from one another. Indeed, both of these titles would have absolutely nothing to do with the cancelled Sonic X-Treme from the 1990s. Sonic X-Treme on Saturn has been talked about at length plenty, including in a 70+ minute long documentary from 2019. And, as can be expected from the reputation of that title from the 90s, none of the three games in the Sonic X-Treme trilogy would ever see the light of day. These two titles have almost no coverage of them out there, hence why I am focusing on them today. This is the story of how the Sonic X-Treme trilogy faced its death in development. Welcome to the Art of Failure. The first of the two Sonic X-Tremes we're looking at today is Sonic X-Treme for the original Xbox. And to start this story off properly, we need to head all the way back to San Diego in 1997. That year, the husband and wife team of Matt and Tammy McDonald would start a company. This would be Visionscape. Originally started as a 3D animation training school, Visionscape Interactive also would act as a video game studio. Some of their early titles would include Razor Racing and The Land Before Time: The Great Valley Racing Adventure for the original PlayStation. Visionscape would also do work on the popular MMO EverQuest and even create an all-original title for Microsoft's Xbox console in 2002, titled Seablade. As is clear from this background, those at VSI had experience working on titles based on popular IPs, and by 2002, they had experience developing titles for the Xbox. Thus, it's easy to see why the McDonalds were able to meet with representatives from an entertainment company popular with children and secure a major IP for a new title for the Xbox. That year, development would begin on Nickelodeon's Rocket Power Zero Gravity Zone, thanks in part to publisher THQ. THQ was a huge name in publishing licensed titles, and had aided in the development and publishing of a wide number of titles based on Nickelodeon properties. These ranged from Rugrats to SpongeBob to even one Rocket Power game already, with this being 2001's Rocket Power Team Rocket Rescue for the PS1. Before we go on, we have to talk about one of the most popular video game series from the turn of the millennium, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. After the first game was released in 1999, THPS skyrocketed into the stratosphere of gaming success, that hype train only picking up steam after the release of THPS 2 in September 2000. Featuring a big real-life name and capitalizing on the mass late 90s obsessions with skateboarding, extreme sports, and performing crazy stunts, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 through 4 saw a quick release over the span of a few years on a huge variety of platforms. Fondly remembered even by folks who didn't care for skateboarding in real life, these titles were easy to pick up and play, featured a licensed soundtrack featuring popular bands, and left such an impact on gaming as we know it, that the first games received an HD re-release in 2020. And though by 2002 THPS's peak popularity was perhaps past, the games were still a household name. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater was hugely popular, and with that came clones. From Sony and Shaba Games' Grind Session to Activision's Disney X-Treme Skate Adventure to even Konami's Evolution Skateboarding featuring Solid Snake, these clone titles were everywhere during the era of the original Xbox, PlayStation 2, and Nintendo GameCube. And THQ wanted VSI to make a THPS clone of their own, this one using the Rocket Power license. Set to feature 12 different areas to play around in and a variety of characters from the show, work began sometime in mid to late 2002, around the time that Seablade was finishing up development. Over the next few months, Matt McDonald and his team would build a fully playable demo of this Rocket Power skateboarding game. It was playable on an original Xbox development unit, and the plan was development from the ground up for the Xbox, then port it to the PS2 and GameCube. Like THPS, it was going to feature open playground-esque skate parks to play around in, along with a robust trick system. There are going to be grind rails and a variety of ramps, and even the option to play against a friend. While even in this early form the game seemed to not deviate too far from that original Tony Hawk formula, it still seemed to keep the heart of what made those games so memorable: the gameplay. By the first months of 2003, it would even be nearly ready to go from an initial playable demo to a full-blown alpha build. But things weren't quite so good at THQ proper. Despite being a big-name publisher at the time, THQ was having some issues in regards to project funding and licensing. Early on in 2003, THQ would axe 13 different projects worked on by a variety of studios. And thanks to both THQ's higher-ups wanting to move some money around internally, and there apparently being some brief licensing weirdness with Nickelodeon, they ended up axing Visionscape's Rocket Power project. All of the months McDonald and his team had put in had potentially gone to waste. And the reasons behind the cancellation of the game's development for the Xbox, PS2, and GameCube as well seems a little odd, due to the accompanying Game Boy Advance port by Ultron still being allowed to proceed. That version of the game would see release that August. Perhaps it was due to the lower cost of developing a Game Boy Advance game compared to a multi-platform home console release. Perhaps the licensing shenanigans got rough enough at one point that THQ decided to just can VSI's project despite the work already put into building the playable demo. Or perhaps there was something more insidious happening in the background at THQ. After all, later in the year, THQ would be one of several major video game companies to be probed by the American Securities and Exchange Commission. Whatever the reason, VSI had a playable Tony Hawk-style skateboarding game engine and demo on their hands, and McDonald didn't want VSI's progress to go to waste. Matt and Tammy McDonald's Visionscape was more than just Visionscape Interactive. They also had a CGI division as well, Visionscape Imaging. And this branch of VSI had worked on several high-profile titles too. In the preceding years, Visionscape Imaging had received credits on the 1999 PS1 game Twisted Metal 4, the 1999 Beowulf movie, and even the 2001 But Ugly Martians cartoon series. Perhaps it was meant to be for VSI to work with Sega at some point. Matt McDonald's earliest video game credit is on 1995's Vector Man, which was published by Sega themselves. In 2003, VSI, the imaging side of the company, not the interactive side, was working with Sega on one of their most anticipated projects yet. VSI was creating the pre-rendered cutscenes for the upcoming Sonic Heroes. Set to release later that year on the Xbox, PS2, and GameCube, this was going to be Sega's follow-up to the much-beloved Sonic Adventure 2 from 2001. And thanks to working with Sega on this project, VSI had access to assets not just from the upcoming game, but also from the two Sonic Adventure titles as well. It was now February 2003, and McDonald had an idea. What if his team took an updated version of the Rocket Power demo and reskinned it to have characters from various popular IPs? Notably, one of these builds of the demo would involve characters based on the popular line of Tech Deck skateboarding toys, which had first risen to massive prominence in the late 90s. The other main version of it, though, would feature Sonic the Hedgehog. Replacing the skateboards with hoverboards, music and still graphical assets taken from Sonic Adventure 2, and a singular main area based on the Seaside Hill Zone from Sonic Heroes, the conversion from a Rocket Power demo to a Sonic demo would only take around a week. Simply titled Sonic X-Treme, it would be made without Sega's knowledge. Due to the short turnaround time in the conversion process from the Rocket Power demo, both the Sonic and Tech Deck demos are very similar. Indeed, they're nearly identical, featuring the same level layouts and even the ability to easily swap models between them. The Sonic demo in particular would have a few notable features though. First off, at the start, players can choose between one of 3 game modes and 2 playable characters. The characters would be Sonic the Hedgehog and his edgy doppelganger from Sonic Adventure 2, Shadow the Hedgehog. The game modes are as follows. There's a one-player mission mode which involves players completing objectives such as collecting keys to obtain a Chaos Emerald. This is also the only strictly single-player mode in the demo. There's also a combat mode, which involves players using random items to fight each other in a manner similar to Mario Kart's battle modes. And finally, there's a one-on-one race mode, which is just a race from one end of the stage to the other, in a manner that does feel almost like the later hover racing Sonic Riders series. Though it is not as strict of a Tony Hawk clone as THQ had wanted back when it was a Rocket Power game, in an odd way, this causes this Sonic demo to have a bit more of its own identity. Granted, the demo is also a bit glitchy too, but remember, this is still a pre-alpha game build, not something ever intended for potential players to experience. However, that doesn't mean it wasn't something that Matt McDonald felt was decent enough to use as a pitch to Sega. Sometime in mid-2003, McDonald managed to arrange a meeting with then Sonic series head, Yuji Naka. Naka was considered a kingmaker of sorts at Sega, and Sonic projects could live or die by his hand. Infamously, the team behind the cancelled Sonic X-Treme on the Sega Saturn had been denied the use of a 3D games engine due to Naka. Indeed, he had a bit of a reputation with some saying he was hard to please. But, according to McDonald, Naka was actually impressed with VSI's Sonic X-Treme demo. He felt that hoverboard racing could be a great idea for a Sonic spin-off, maybe even a Sonic spin-off series, and seemed to hint that VSI should be the ones for the job. McDonald was then informed that he would be hearing from Sega soon to finalize some paperwork, get the green light, and formally begin development. And then, nothing. Despite trying to reach out to Naka and Sega through his agent over the next several months, the only communication McDonald and VSI received in return was in regard to Sonic Heroes cutscene development. Though Naka had told McDonald at the pitch meeting that he would hear back from him soon, Naka would never contact him again. Once Sonic Heroes had finished development, Sega ceased all contact with VSI entirely. It seems that should have meant the end for VSI's skateboarding game, but not quite. It ends up that a deal was able to be reached for the Tech Deck license, and a game was able to be fully developed, albeit on PC. This original Xbox skateboarding game, titled Tech Deck Bare Knuckle Grind, would never see release, nor would any of the other originally planned home console ports. Instead, it would be exclusively released on PCs as part of a new line from Tech Deck called the Digital Playset. Basically, the game would be split up upon release. The levels were spread among multiple discs, which themselves were sold with certain Tech Deck toys. By buying more Tech Decks, you wouldn't just get more toys, but more levels for Bare Knuckle Grind on PC itself. Every game disc was basically an expansion pack that could also be played on its own, though each individual game disc was rather limited, containing content equivalent to one major level. This Sonic X-Treme did not start off as Sonic X-Treme, and it didn't end up as Sonic X-Treme either. And in the end, it didn't even see release on the Xbox. But it is interesting to see that in an odd way, it did eventually see release. But this was not the end for Sonic's hoverboarding adventures. In 2006, Sega would release the first of a new Sonic sub-series called Sonic Riders. Though it was much more fast-paced than the X-Treme demo, it should be noted that Sonic Riders was a fully fledged game that had seen a full development cycle. And it had also been done as a collaboration between Sonic Team and Studio Now Production in Japan, a situation that meant Sega had much more direct control over the project. When Matt McDonald first learned of Sonic Riders' existence, he saw the similarities between it and the Sonic demo he had helped create nearly 3 years prior. His first course of action was to contact his lawyer. Unfortunately for him, he was soon informed that, due to being a demo featuring Sega characters and assets created while under a specific contract from Sega, the demo was legally Sega's property. They could do whatever they wanted with it, even if that meant merely using it as inspiration for a Sonic game by a different team. Once again, that should have been the end of this Sonic X-Treme story. After all, the general gaming public had no knowledge that it was ever being worked on. But that all changed in 2011. That year, a member on the Assembler Games forum named ProtonX would post about a Sonic demo he found on an original Xbox development kit. This would be VSI's Sonic X-Treme. A few years after work stopped on Sonic X-Treme and Bare Knuckle Grind on Xbox, Visionscape was set to move on to newer, more advanced systems. After all, they're still around today, though they later changed their name to Heavy Water and, as of 2021, are known as Axis Game Factory Inc. When it was time to get rid of the Xbox development hardware, Matt McDonald organized for employees to drop off their units at a recycling center. However, not all followed through with this, and over 5 years later, one of those units fell into the hands of ProtonX. ProtonX would release a sizable amount of information about the X-Treme demo online, including uploading gameplay videos to YouTube, albeit videos filmed by pointing a camcorder at a TV screen. Even more information would later be released, though, by Andrew Borman, a digital games curator with the Museum of Play in Rochester, New York. Borman had tracked down the only known build of the game, and had dug into its contents before releasing his findings online. Speaking of which, Borman is also directly responsible for helping make this documentary possible today, thanks to giving permission to have his gameplay footage used throughout. Perhaps the oddest thing about the release of that initial Xbox Sonic X-Treme footage, though, was its reception from gaming media. Despite being a pre-alpha build, basically a playable proof-of-concept demo that was never meant to be shown to the public, many outlets took to critiquing this cancelled game footage like it was footage of a fully released product. Indeed, it's even debatable if Sonic X-Treme on the Xbox classifies as a cancelled game. Sega never formally greenlit the project, and the game would later make its way onto PC, albeit not as a Sonic game. Can you even cancel a project that's never formally begun? Regardless, here is an example of what the gaming press at the time had to say.
If there's one franchise that knows subpar spin-outs more than any other, it's Sonic the Hedgehog. Whether it's a new Hedgehog with a gun or Sonic falling in love with a human, Sega has gone above and beyond when it comes to killing any fond memories we had of the speedy rodent. A new video has surfaced of a Sonic skateboarding game for Xbox, and it looks predictably awful. In a rare act of discretion, it seems that a game in the series was actually deemed unsuitable for retail shelves. Game Informer 2011.
It seems odd to critique a cancelled video game that technically only had a little bit of gameplay footage to show what it was like. However, at least Sonic X-Treme on Xbox had that much. Even less information and assets are available from the cancelled Sonic X-Treme on Game Boy Advance. In 2019, for Sonic's 28th birthday, former Backbone Entertainment employee Arvin Bautista would release several pieces of concept art and a title screen mock-up of a cancelled Game Boy Advance game from around 2006. Meant to coexist with the Sonic Riders games, this would also be Sonic X-Treme. Formed after a merger between several other game companies in 2003, Backbone Entertainment themselves were no strangers to the Sonic the Hedgehog series. In 2006, they also developed the first Sonic game for Sony's PlayStation Portable handheld, Sonic Rivals. They would also later develop a follow-up, Sonic Rivals 2, as well as the Sonic's Ultimate Genesis collection for the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3. Based in Emeryville, California, Backbone was known for its work on projects for companies such as Namco, Capcom, Taito, and of course, Sega. Around the time Sonic Riders was released in 2006, the prospect of a portable entry in the Riders series was looked into. Whether this title would exist as its own title, perhaps starting a sub-series of its own on portable systems, or be a port of the Riders series proper, was never fully decided on. Now, a direct port of the fast-paced Riders would have been impossible on the 32-bit GBA. So, though their game would use similar assets, as after all Backbone's team was given access to assets from the first Riders game, a more retro Sega-inspired look and feel would be aimed for by them. One of the most iconic classic Sega arcade games is Outrun. Originally released in 1986, it made use of Sega's Super Scalar arcade technology, allowing for fast-paced scrolling and a point of view that appears pseudo-3D. And it just so happened that Backbone had an Outrun-style game engine of their own that apparently ran quite well on the GBA. After only a couple of months of working on a pitch demo for Sega, Bautista and their team had several playable levels, including one especially polished level that was intended to truly wow Sega's higher-ups. At this point, there is also a slew of power-ups, a playable Sonic, rival computer-controlled players represented by fan-favorite character Knuckles the Echidna, and even work beginning on creating sprite work for several other additional playable characters. Bautista, producer James Stanley, and the others on the team were truly committed to this project. They pulled a number of late nights, with Bautista reporting at least one all-nighter while working on the project. But this didn't seem to be coming from a place of corporate-induced crunch. The team just seemed to be excited to be working on a potentially all-new Sonic game. So the weeks went past, and finally the time came for the pitch meeting with Sega's higher-ups and Sonic team. According to Bautista, they had a project on their hands that they thought would really impress in its current state. It unfortunately did not. Project producer James Stanley got word from the pitch meeting that Sega had decided not to move forward with Backbone's project. They felt that the Outrun-style game engine, though charmingly retro in a way, also looked old and dated. Those at Sega and Sonic team wanted a full real-time 3D game, something more similar to the console Riders games, which was also something that was just not possible on the Game Boy Advance. Indeed, for something like this to have truly been possible, it would have likely required a leap to the much newer Nintendo DS hardware. Try as they might with their existing work, Backbone's team couldn't get a new engine running on the GBA that satisfied Sega. The project was axed, and the third and final of the trilogy of Sonic X-Treme games faced its death in development. But not all in the tale of Sonic X-Treme, all 3 of them, was terrible. As we've seen today, though the mainline Sonic X-Treme on Saturn never got released, Sonic X-Treme on Xbox eventually did, albeit on PC and not as a Sonic game. And as for Batista, he was just excited to have gone to work on a series that he had loved since he was a kid.
I was crushed we lost the game, but as I was going home that day, I was also relieved. I was already a little loopy from the late nights, and that was just for a quick demo. I would have had some serious health issues if we had landed the project. I might not have gotten to work on a Sonic game, but I was glad to have come close. It was so fun to work on an IP that I loved as a kid, and I even learned a few tricks on making backgrounds from it.